Hello, class. Today we are going to be talking about child sexual assault with an emphasis on males. We'll be exploring the effects on development, as well as an overview of the topic, why is it important to counseling techniques that work, and some cultural implications. The presenters of this project are Nikki Penwell, Eric Anderson, Shantell Ward, and Jason Harshberger. Sexual abuse among males is incredibly common. Depending on the study used, it is shown that between 12 to 16% of all males are survivors of childhood sexual abuse. This number does vary depending on the study performed and is often viewed as underreported because most do not feel what happened to them was sexual abuse. Oftentimes, society views sexual abuse as rape or groping. However, it does not take into account that showing a child sexual images that they didn't want to see or talking in a sexual way can be considered sexual abuse as well. Sexual abuse is defined as sexual activity where another exploits or dominates another. This can include molestation, groping, harassment, pornography, or other sexual activity that is unwanted. Incest is the most common type of sexual abuse. Many times abuse happens before the child turns 18. There are many developmental concerns related to childhood sexual abuse, especially in males. Males who survive sexual violence are likely to struggle to have healthy, intimate relationships. There is concern for increased suicidal ideation, depression, and substance abuse. Males who are sexually abused also often turn to pornography and other forms of sexual addiction and other types of sexual acting out. Males may also suffer from a poor sense of self and struggle with identity issues. The American culture isn't the best for males who are survivors of sexual abuse. Many males internalize the idea that they are not manly if they are assaulted. This leads to shame when it comes to seeking help. Most presentation of the issue is directed towards female survivors, which can cause males to feel like it doesn't happen to them. Many males also show signs of being aroused while they are assaulted. This is used by perpetrators to tell them that they wanted it, or a male just might feel shame because he became aroused while it happened. There are many resources to seek help from. Survivors can seek help from a rape crisis center, RAINN, counselors, and child first centers. As a counselor, looking into what's available in your area will be a great benefit for survivors. When somebody seeks help, it is important that they seek help from somebody that is able to meet them with empathy and understanding. The sooner somebody seeks help, the easier the recovery will be. And now on to Eric for the implications on counseling.
Why is childhood sexual abuse important in counseling and looking at the effect it has when children grow up to their adulthood? Also impacts the development through the lifespan is one of the problems, and some of the other problems are impacts intimate relationships with the partner, father-child relationship. We also look at the problems of clinical implications for working with child survivors and the present gap in the literature and research of the CSA childhood sexual assault and the myths. Thus, talking about the clinical implications for working with male survivors, instilling three main concepts, or focus on three main concepts: instilling hope, to develop a sense of self and personal meaning. We also want to look at, or we're discussing, the myths that can impact the counseling relationship and identifies the implications that these myths pose for counselors. Importance to counseling and further clinical suggestions. Instilling hope in a client and looking at that instilled hope. Developing a sense of self, establishing personal meaning or purpose. Experiencing healing from the trauma, receiving the same level of treatment offered to females. Addressing the myth that men cannot be raped. The definition of rape itself has a significant impact. It is defined as an act or attempted attack involving unwanted sexual contact either by force or non-forcibly. One of the myths with childhood sexual assault is that when men talk about this, one of the myths is that men cannot be raped. That is a outstanding myth because of culture and climate, and some of the reason is because men can defend themselves. There are usually more than two attackers, and sometimes in a lot of instances there are weapons being used. Survivors of childhood sexual assault express fears that they will not be able to sustain the role of a loving caretaker, intimate partner, and other adult. It is common for most men to describe their roles of partner and father as emotionally, mentally, and physically taxing. Male survivors of sexual assault often live with a heightened dread that will turn out to be inadequate partners and fathers due to the traumatic experience. They are fearful of becoming parents because they do not want to abuse their own children, because they feel insecure discussing sexuality with their children, unsure of what would be helpful and what might be harmful for the children to hear. Other sexual or psychology disturbances that follow sexual attacks. It is imperative that male victims receive the same level of compassion and sensitive treatment that is offered to females. Acknowledging the existence of rape myths and understanding their inaccuracies, counselors can work to discourage their acceptance within the general population within professional circles. Awareness, advocacy, and training, counselors can help to reduce male victim blaming to encourage more services for male survivors and ensure these individuals receive appropriate treatment.
An important aspect to evaluate is the relevance that child sexual assault among the male population has on minority populations. Counselors need to be aware of the differences that can affect a male child from disclosing sexual trauma. These differences include in the culture, religion, fear of further oppression, and sexual orientation that all affect disclosure. Without these factors being present, children already deal with disbelief during disclosure without additional factors. Different cultures create environments where children do not feel safe after disclosing abuse. The Arabs and India, for instance, shame the child for even mentioning sexual abuse. In Mexico, boys are antagonized by women saying that they're possibly gay if they lack interest in sexual intercourse with women, especially older ones. Also, in some cultures, who disclose abuse by women implies that the boy is less manly. Disclosing sexual abuse by men causes a blow to their masculinity as well. Certain religious aspects affect male children from disclosing. The Buddhists believe that abuse is a karmatic retribution from something that occurred in a previous life. Because of this, families are encouraged not to proceed with prosecutions for fear of continuing the cycle of karma. The Jewish do not believe that for the sake of honoring their parents, children should not fight off or assaults or disclose their abuse. Some Catholics also expect the child to suffer through sexual abuse in silence, which is seen to them as a cross that they must bear. Fear of further oppression by minority groups also affects disclosure. Disproportionate impact of child welfare causes minority populations to handle the abuse themselves. Allowing public disclosure also risks the dissolution of enforced orphaning of a child, forcing children into foster care. Members of oppressed groups face further stigmatization as a unique cost of reporting sexual abuse. Children who become concerned with are also concerned with their reputation and position in the group if the disclosure were to come public. Lastly, oppressed groups fear disclosure to the public will be used to further exclude them from the American mainstream. Finally, sexual orientation has an effect on their disclosure. As we said before, children fear that they will be viewed as gay if they disclose sexual abuse from either male or females. There has been cases when those who have turned out to be gay as an adult wonder whether or not if their abuser, especially if it was their father, also had homosexual tendencies.
For male victims of child sexual assault, there is research about different treatments that have been used and their effectiveness. Different journal articles lift up different approaches, such as family-based therapy, where the family works together with the victim of the assault. Cognitive behavior therapy, which helps the individual unpack and process further the situation. And then specifically, trauma-based or trauma-focused cognitive therapy that looks again at the situation, the circumstance, and the outcome. In each of the journal articles reviewed, there was success found with a specific therapy model. With many different treatment plans showing that they can be successful, there are some common elements that stand out as a part of those successful treatments. This includes disclosing the abuse, making meaning of one's trauma, and developing supporting relationships. In a faith-based counseling setting, one can look at certain biblical truths as a part of those common elements. Within disclosing abuse, there is a proclamation and an affirmation that takes place. As noted throughout this presentation, one of the greatest hurdles for young men to deal with is owning that the abuse or disclosing that the abuse happened. In the biblical worldview, that stands as a proclamation and an affirmation, which is so incredibly important in this process. The second is making meaning out of one's trauma. And this is done with good, healthy counseling, relationships that are formed, but also for the individual, through the process of prayer and discernment, they can hopefully begin to sort out and make some meaning of one's trauma. That prayer and discernment piece is seen regularly throughout the totality of Scripture as such an incredible part of how we come to understand all that is unfolding in our lives. The third piece is developing supporting relationships. And this comes as a huge part of what Scripture teaches us, the importance and the fact that we are designed to be in relationship. Through developing supportive relationships, one can begin to rebuild some trust, know that they are affirmed and loved and prayed for. And then as that relationship or relationships continue to grow, hopefully support and growth and movement and healing can all occur in this process.
Some concluding thoughts as we wrapped up this presentation. We looked at the scope of sexual assault in males. We've also looked at its implications in counseling, how it affects minority populations, focusing primarily on religious populations, and we've also looked at how it is addressed in the counseling room. With this, we focused on some different therapies and how, as a counselor, we can help move these men forward. When it comes to this topic on a whole, it is important to look at further research opportunities as well as ways to prevent this problem from continuing to occur. Some research opportunities are going to be looking at racial minority populations in the United States. There was very limited research in African American populations as well as in Native American populations and other populations. This would be important to look into just because different cultural backgrounds react differently to disclosure of sexual abuse. We also want to look at prevention. There is a lot of different prevention laws that have been passed recently, one of which is Aaron's Law. And all of these laws focus on teaching kids that they're the boss of their bodies, how to disclose sexual abuse if it happens to them, and how to recognize the grooming process. Many times children don't recognize that something bad is about to happen because they've been told to ignore their personal body boundaries. So if we can focus on teaching kids how to monitor their boundaries, they are less likely to be abused. At least that is what the hope is in programs like Aaron's Law. At this point in time, we don't know the full effectiveness because they haven't been around long enough, and that in and of itself presents another research opportunity to research the effectiveness of Aaron's Law to preventing sexual abuse. While we know it increases disclosures, we don't know if it can stop it from happening by children recognizing the grooming process. I want to thank everybody for listening to our presentation, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.